The Department of Communications and Digital Technologies has proposed stricter regulations around the advertising of alcohol and unhealthy food in South Africa. In its recently published white paper, which came out last week, the department said that the regulations should be introduced in an effort to protect the country's children from potentially harmful advertising. This would include regulations around the advertising of alcohol beverages, food that are high in salt, sugar, fat, saturated fats, or trans fatty acids, or otherwise do not fit national or international nutritional guidelines. Joining me now to talk about this is the Acting Director General at the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, Nomvuyiso Batyi. DG, good evening and thank you very much for joining us on the news feed late night. That is a mouthful. What is food that is really not fit for national or international nutrition guidelines?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers at home. Maybe let's just perhaps contextualize it, that the white paper that is being referred to does not only talk to this. This is an overhaul of a legislative process that started from 1999. So you will recognize that in South Africa, advertising as part of the broadcasting landscape has been, there's been an attempt to regulate it by different spheres of government. And currently, there is a proposal that says advertising and in its entirety in the form of audio and audiovisual, including foods, including alcohol, should be dealt with within the realm of the audio and audiovisual space. So that's why I'm saying this paper is over. This is just like a part of it. It's actually not more than 2 pages out of 160-page document. Yeah. So, this is just
those 2 pages could have fundamental impact, particularly to spaza shops. You know, you've got those informal traders who sell kotas, who sell magwinyas, who sell chips, those junk food that people engage in the townships, and they do tend to then write boards of some sort and advertise. In inverted commas. This particular white paper, does it in any way affect those businesses?
No, actually, this actually affects the audio and the audiovisual space, which is your traditional broadcasting, and also including what you'd call on-demand services, which will be online. It does not affect your normal trader that you would find anywhere, let's say your general dealer store that would be advertising within their premises. But insofar as they move and they come to advertise in the audio and audiovisual space, which is your traditional broadcasting and the on-demand services, then the proposal is saying that then they should, as you would appreciate that in the broadcasting space, we have what you call watershed period when it comes to advertising, that certain foods are not advertised wherein there's children programming, as you know currently in South Africa, that we are not allowed to advertise alcohol between certain hours of the day when you are in the audio and an audiovisual space. Yeah. So this is trying to have an all-encompassing regulatory framework that will deal specifically with the space that we occupy.
Now, in 2019, the Department of Health was calling for front-of-pack warning labels. Is this in any way in line with that, or is it something completely different?
It's something completely different, because that was talking to more a labeling of food. How do you check the calories and the likes and correct advertising in the form of what is contained, let's say, bitter cool drink or whatever. This actually says, out of that which you would find at the Department of Health, at what point do you advertise it? Especially when it comes to children. You would know that there are various countries across the world, including South Africa, that does not, for instance, advertise junk food wherein there is children's programming during the day. So this seeks to have an all-encompassing framework to cover those in South Africa under one umbrella, instead of having too many regulators dealing with the same issue but differently.
Yeah. Does the white paper prescribe how this advertisement should be regulated? For example, we know that the advertising of cigarettes, for example, is completely banned on our television and on our radio, so we don't see that at all. You are talking about, for example, this would have an impact on the scheduling. What do you say? Certain takeaway chains would need to advertise at night. One would say, again, it defeats the purpose because most of them are advertising for a particular audience, which is children, which is normally attached to their programming that happens during the day.
But who's buying for the children? So at the end of the day, remember, the purpose of this is to ensure that the person that has the buying power, which is the parent, is the targeted person insofar as advertising, especially when it comes to unhealthy foods. That's the first thing. It's the same thing that in order to curb underage drinking, that, as you would know, there's various regulations that are in place that will actually tell you when not to advertise in South Africa. So this is trying to cover also, because you'll see that most of those adverts have moved away from your traditional broadcasting, such as yourselves on TV and or radio, but you'll find them online, which is on-demand services, part of on-demand services, that you will find any form of, be it those foods that you would ordinarily find on a radio or a television. So that is where we're saying that this has to be, it's trying to curb and close that gap.
Now, when we come back to the topic on alcohol, the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance saying that there is already a bill that was introduced in 2016, in essence, that would have had some kind of extensive impact on restrictions around the advertising of alcohol on various platforms, including on social media. That particular bill was broadly canvassed. In fact, extensive public consultation process was undertaken, but it's kind of now dead in the water.
That is the bill that was published, I think, by the then Department of Trade and Industry. It is. That is, you'll see the difference with this white paper. This white paper actually involves a number of experts within the broadcasting and audiovisual space that actually is saying, look, instead of having a legislation being all over different departments, let's have our government department, that is communications and digital technologies, that has always dealt with issues of advertising, to actually deal with advertising rules to say what needs to happen. And let's say now we receive an objection, somebody says, actually it's not placed with you. It's best placed where it was, if that was the context, then that would be taken under advice. But currently, as things stand, this is designed to protect, as you would know, we have agencies such as the Film and Publication Board. This is designed to protect children and also curb the scourge of underage drinking in South Africa. That is, I do not want this interview to actually think that this white paper only deals with that. This white paper also deals with the new licensing regime. There's a number of interventions that we have on this white paper. Ownership and control as to who needs to control audio and audiovisual entities in South Africa. Foreign direct owners and economic interests that might be there. So there's not only this part that when people are looking at this white paper that they need to focus on.
So I mean, today a webinar was held around the transformation of the advertising space in particular, where a lot was heard around the voice of young black creatives being sidelined as far as what goes on our televisions and what goes on our radio. Does this white paper speak to those particular issues of transformation?
No. This paper talks to traditional ownership of an audio space, such as an audiovisual, such as television set, television ownership. So you'll find, for instance, in South Africa, you may or may not be aware that there's a limitation of ownership, of foreign ownership in South Africa, which is sitting at 20%. There's also a limitation of how many FMs or AMs you can own as a staple in South Africa, and there's cross-media ownership. So this is trying to relax those rules, however, ensuring that BBBE is also embedded in legislation. So it's relaxing how you can bring in investors into your company. it's not setting the cap at 20%. It's saying the cap must be expanded to up to 49%, but following processes that ICASA may want to be involved in. But it's saying you should be able to attract people onto your stable to give you funding, to give you new ideas, insofar as the ownership of an audiovisual space.
So what I'm hearing there, you want to attract more investors to come in from outside, to come and buy some of our audio and audiovisual products?
That is part of it, that we need to attract people to come to invest in our space. We know and appreciate that there has been the audio and audiovisual space has been impacted severely by the new technologies that you find, such as the artificial intelligence. Now, with the pandemic, you may be aware that also this has impacted greatly in terms of the revenue streams that you would have enjoyed in previous years. So those are the kind of things that we looked at holistically, and we say, look, maybe it's time to actually join forces with other people, especially within the African Union, that may want to partly own the stables that are currently in South Africa from an investment point of view.
But DG, what would be the impact of that when you've got some players within the country, for example, in the community radio space, who themselves are fighting for that piece of the cake? In fact, the laws for them are even stricter now. If you ask them, they'll tell you that the department is asking for an arm and a leg just for us to stay on air, and we don't have the funds and the resources to adhere to some of these strict stipulations that you're putting down.
Okay, I must say, okay, there is still the three-tiered broadcasting, which is a public, commercial, and in community. But within those spheres, there is a relaxation of rules, especially the commercial and the community, as to who can come in to actually invest in those spaces. And then the second thing that I would like to raise, that MDDA has actually been funding a lot of community broadcasting before and during COVID, and assisting them insofar as paying for their transmission cost with Centre. So because it seems like a very general statement to say that there's onerous obligations on community broadcasters, whereas there are these platforms such as the MDDA that actually give you funding as a community broadcaster to make sure that you're in aid. The only thing that I would tell you that some community broadcasters find onerous is that there are strict requirements insofar that when you say you are representing a community, that community must have a voice. That community must vote you into that radio station. Those are the rules that some amongst the community radio space are found wanting if you to check the compliance report of ICASA. So it's more of an individual kind of thing, but there are those community broadcasters that are thriving, and you will find those in faith-based, especially be it Muslim, be it Christianity, be it Jewish, but you find those that are quite compliant because they are representing a specific community of interest. And that community of interest is quite broad when we say faith-based. If you think about it, there's so many people that will be representing that type of a faith. So those tend to thrive. But if it's, we find that if it's specific geographic interest, then the lines get blurred. Yeah. So you see those nuances within the community radio space.
No, actually, DG, I want to bring you back in because I want us to specifically talk about that, and I can cite a number of those community radio stations who were threatened to be shut down. In fact, others have been shut down, but we can talk broadly so that we speak specific cases on that particular scope. But let me thank you tonight for joining us. That is the acting DG at the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, Nomvuyiso Batyi.